So, dear friends, dear researchers, and dear partners, first of all, I would like to thank Victoria and the Cyberjustice team for their tremendous work. Thank you for being with us today. For those who do not know me, I'm Karim Benyekhlef. I'm a professor at the Faculty of Law here at the Université de Montréal and director of the Cyberjustice Lab. I have had the great privilege of coordinating the work of the Autonomy through Cyberjustice Technology project since 2018. Since then, the field of AI has evolved significantly, notably with the emergence of generative AI. This work on generative AI and its textual dimension is, of course, highly relevant for legal scholars whose essential material is text, information itself. I will come back to that in a moment. I will not list here the many achievements of the ACT project researchers. There are so many of them. I simply wish to express my deep gratitude to all those who have contributed to the project and who have demonstrated that a multidisciplinary team is the best way to understand a phenomenon as complex and as uncertain in its consequences as AI. Your work has paved the way toward a better understanding of the social and legal implication of technology in general and AI in particular. It has resonated both nationally and internationally and will help us better grasp the true usefulness of AI for law and justice, beyond the euphoric, marketing-driven, and of course exaggerated claims of the industry. The historian Elisabeth Eisenstein, a leading specialist on the history of printing, wrote in her magnum opus, The Printing Press as an Agent of Change, that even today, almost 600 years after Gutenberg, it remains difficult to fully measure the consequences of the printing press on our societies. So we should therefore remain humble, though we may stand on the shoulders of this giant. The question of involving multiple disciplines in a research project raises several issues. Funding agencies seems to have nothing but the word interdisciplinary on their lips. It is always striking to see to what extent these funding bodies, supposed to represent the excellence and freedom of research, are sometimes influenced by fashionable teams promoted by consulting firms. No doubt this is meant to satisfy elected officials whose attention span, much like that of fruit flies, shifts according to the trend of the moment. The idea of bringing together several disciplines to address a problem is only valid if it does not result in the colonization of one discipline by another. Mireille Hildebrandt, Professor Mireille Hildebrandt, who will be speaking in a few moments, has clearly understood the danger, as she pleads, for a cross-disciplinary approach, and she wrote, I'm quoting her, "The idea here is not that other disciplines impose their assumption and methods on legal practice or legal scholarship, as with law and economics, but on the contrary, that the finding of other scientific practice are put to the test in a court of law." And more precisely, she wrote, cross-disciplinary research by lawyers would imply that they learn to engage with computer science based on the assumptions, goals, and methodologies of computer science without, however, integrating them in their own discipline. As we said in French, chacun chez soi et les moutons seront bien gardés. This is exactly what we strive to do at the Cyberjustice Lab, to understand AI without abandoning our legal methods of analysis. It is essential to invest upstream of the deployment of AI tools, that is, to integrate our legal requirement directly into the development of those tools. It is not always easy. We must acknowledge that. The penetration of computer science methods and practices into the justice system is often at the root of the many failures or delays, see for example the Lexus project in Quebec, the many failures or delays in court digital initiatives, as we observe during the Towards Cyberjustice project conducted from 2011 to 2018, and with several researchers who are here with us today. Moreover, it is quite difficult to assess or even to measure the real consequences of AI on our societies, on the law, on jobs related to law and justice, and on the expectation of emerging generation who may increasingly demand the use of AI, not merely as a research and discovery tool, but perhaps, who knows, even as a decision-making instrument. God forbid. And to render the question more complex even, AI is now part of a geopolitical struggle for domination between the United States and China, the goal being to assert control on AI by all means, because it is assumed that this control will be the source of domination. How can we be so sure? Given the tremendous development of AI in China, it seems difficult to isolate it. It is also difficult to believe that AI can be controlled by a single nation. But an AI duopoly seems to emerge, leaving the European Union by the wayside, which only has regulation and the belief that it is a normative power, and Canada, which has what left exactly? The ability to finance brains so that they can be better exported to our imperial neighbor? And what then is the fate that awaits the other country in Africa, South America, and elsewhere? AI, like any technical phenomenon, is a pharmacon, as Bernard Stiegler proposed. That is to say, it is both a remedy and a poison. It has tremendous potential for advancement and a dark side whose serious consequences we foresee. Is it too soon to regulate AI? This was one of the crucial questions that motivated ACT researchers. In Canada and elsewhere, some argue that too rapid regulation would curb or even restrain innovation. We know this old song. We heard it a lot in the early days of the internet. It's the usual playbook of industrialists who don't really know what they are doing, but know very well that it must be done quickly, as if speed were a guarantee of success. The absence of any regulation in the first 30 years of the internet shows that inaction by the sovereign can have serious consequences that are difficult to correct. Yet, constraints are tremendous incentive to innovate and create. Many studies demonstrate this. And take a look at China. US export controls have forced Chinese businesses to become creative, imaginative, cutting edge. And DeepSeek is a LLM tool for a fraction of the price of ChatGPT and others. And another example, the automobile, very simply. This automobile industry, the example of the automobile industry is telling. The multiple constraints imposed on the automobile industry over the years, from the obligation to install indicators, to seat belt and other safety devices, to anti-pollution measures, etc., have not diminished the innovation of the automobile industry. But AI regulation has now become a geopolitical and geo-economic issue. And the European Union, a normative power, is beginning to suffer the consequences. And giving in so quickly and so completely to the Trump administration tariff policies, why one might wonder if it will resist for much longer the aversion displayed by big tech and the administration to the Digital Service Act, to the AI Act, to the Digital Market Act, among others. The prospects are not good. We'll see. As for Canada, after having given in so quickly on the platform tax, we wonder how it will be possible to have an autonomous and sovereign regulatory policy, a policy that meets our national imperatives. These issues are not far removed from the ACT project. The development of a normative framework specific to our judicial and administrative justice system is a matter of the strictest sovereignty. Canadian justice cannot be totally dependent on a foreign technology over which it has no control. We cannot approach the use of AI in law and justice in isolation. This use must be placed in a broader framework. Whoever controls the standard of a technology controls the market. So Canada must assert its sovereignty over these technologies just as it has imposed national standards in other sectors, automotive, broadcasting, health, etc. We must not give in to the fashions and discourse of AI industrialists, but we must not deprive ourselves of the possible advantages offered by these tools. Our program for today and tomorrow will of course not cover all aspects of the use of AI in our societies, but it will allow us to have a better understanding of the fundamental issues facing justice. This program must allow for a critical analysis of the use of AI in law and justice, to distinguish the promises that will never be kept from the real capabilities of these tools. And for that, I'm very pleased to welcome Professor Mireille Hildebrandt from the Vrije Universiteit of Brussels, the Free University of Brussels. Mireille, a researcher of the ACT project, has a very long track record. She's a professor of law, a lawyer, a philosopher. She has been a co-director of the research group on law, science, technology, and society studies, best way to understand technology and law. She received an ERC Advanced Grant for the from the European Commission for a very large project entitled, Counting as a Human Being in the Era of Computational Law. And very interestingly, she is the co-founder of the Journal of Cross-Disciplinary Research in Computational Law. She has published extensively on the subject. She is one of the leading experts on issues related to law and technologies. She is the ideal person to chart the course of our work and initiate discussion. I thank her for giving us the honor of opening our conference. And Mireille, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your very kind words. It is my honor to speak here. And I want to, yes, it works. So I want to make a connection between legal contestability as one of the core principles, institutionalized principles of the rule of law, and scientific falsifiability as core to what makes research and knowledge scientific. I want to take you through a very brief exposition or demonstration of a tool we built within the ERC Advanced Grant project, which is a typology of legal technologies. I will show it to you. Then I have one slide to remind all of us of what this contestability of the rule of law actually means. One slide, but you are already familiar with it, I will assume. We live off assumptions, right? And then I will go into the heart of what I want to say and discuss Popper's falsification as the criterion that distinguishes knowledge that can be called scientific from other knowledge, and move back also to Charles Sanders Peirce, who was a pragmatist, semiotician, and philosopher of science, who shared with Popper the idea of fallibilism. I'll get back to it. And then connect this with AI and the role of theory and the role of empirical inductive testing of the theory to establish falsification. And then I will wrap up. So let's start. For me, with legal technology, the first question should be the reliability. And reliability for health or for safety is not exactly the same as it is in legal practice, because here we're talking about the integrity of the administration of justice. Oh, no, I have to talk like this, right? Yeah. So one of the solutions that I myself put forward, and that's of course not because of me, but because many others have put it forward, has developed a new subdomain within the discipline of computer science, is to try to explain how a system works. So I call that the XAI conundrum. And I think at this moment, trying to explain what these systems do, how their inner system works, has become a distraction from the perspective of law, of what we actually need. What we need is practical and effective protection, and in law that depends on justification. So if I can explain how a system works, that is not a justification. So we need research on how the explanation, under what condition and in which cases, and how the explanation of a system can contribute to justification, right? Because it's just that and nothing else from the perspective of the law. Oh, yes. So I think we need to raise a whole series of other questions, and I'm going to just quickly demonstrate the typology of legal technologies that we built. So this is open on the internet. We have picked, I think, 48 different systems, papers, or data sets, researched them, raised a series of questions, compared them, and chosen 30 legal texts that we think are typical. That means we're not trying to be complete. We're also not trying to find 30 systems that are mutually exclusive. This is not a taxonomy, this is a typology, so they overlap. And you can see that in the format. So the idea of a cross-disciplinary methodology means that as lawyers, so this was a project where computer scientists collaborated with lawyers, legal scholars, that they have to learn to understand each other's language. That is about assumptions, methodologies, and goals. So we developed a legal vocabulary for the computer scientists and a computer science vocabulary for the lawyers. And we did that for code-driven and data-driven. So here you have a set of concepts that are part of the methodology of data-driven AI. And we have asked computer scientists in close collaboration with us, let's look at support vector machines, to give a succinct, a simple, but not too simple, description of what this methodology is and does, look at the related terms in the same vocabulary, link it with the examples in the typology, give some further reading, and well, here you get naive Bayes methodologies. That's the next entry. Let's quickly look at the typology. Yeah, so here you see the typology. So this is about applications. Then you get all the systems, their applications. We also included curated data sets on which others can build other systems, and we included a set of very important scientific papers. We distinguish these systems by looking at who are the deployers, to think in terms of the AI Act. So is this courts, is this criminal justice authorities? So they select. Let's go back. Then we looked at different types of functionalities, and you can also sort them in data-driven and code-driven, or both. So you can play around with them. And let's take case text. Case text is now part of Westlaw. It's been bought by Thomson Reuters, which is very interesting also to see how this moves. We are not updating this typology because we are looking at what is typical for a specific type of technology, and we take it from there. So here you see we look at what is this specific technology claimed to do. We summarize that, and everything we say we have taken from publicly available information. Often, in the case of commercial systems, that is PR, but still, that's what they claim they do. The next question is the substantiation of those claims. And one of the issues with that substantiation is that proprietary systems, it's more difficult to find that. But nevertheless, sometimes papers are available and our computer scientists could look into how these systems are presented, what claims are made, and deduct from that how they actually worked. And we took from that substantiation the specific technical issues that arise, that make the system already from a technical perspective problematic compared to the claims made, and legal issues. And then we look at whether the deployer of the system can assess, that is, test its reliability, which with proprietary systems is usually very difficult, whether it's currently in use, who have created this, is it technical people, lawyers, both, from which jurisdiction do they come, for which jurisdiction or jurisdictions do they claim that this system is going to work, compare it with the background, always very interesting. And then whether it's licensed, etc. Okay, I'm just trying to showing you this. So if you've noticed, we're not asking how to explain the system, and we're asking completely different questions. And I think these questions are absolutely key. So the idea of the typology is use these questions to get your finger behind what these systems actually do, not the PR behind it. In this talk, I want to dig still deeper, to ask still different questions, and basically to claim that there is a need for scientific research and to move from the metrics on models, accuracy, etc., to the need for a falsifiable theory. One slide on the contestability of law. So law creates a rule-based order. In English, we talk about the rule of law. In continental Europe, we might talk about the rechtsstaat, the état de droit. I think that's a better term because it focuses on the internal division of sovereignty and on checks and balances. And not about the fact that this is about rules, because the rule of law is much more than that. I often use Ulysses and the Sirens to explain what exactly that means. So Ulysses wanted to hear the sirens, we all do, but he also knew that if he would be with them, he would be lured into staying with them and starve to death. So he told his sailors, I'm going to tie myself to the mast, so that when they start singing, I can hear them, but I'm on the mast and the ship will sail, so I can have my cake, my cake, and eat it too, right? But now he knew that as soon as he would start hearing the sirens, he would scream to his sailors and say, untie me, I'm going to stay here. So he waxed his ears. And why am I telling this? Well, because some people think that the rule of law is about self-binding. No, it's not. It's about checks and balances. Tying yourself as a sovereign to the mast is not enough. We need other checks and balances like the independent judiciary, etc. So the contestability must be institutionalized in the real world by way of countervailing powers. And that means that the judicial procedure will be adversarial, contradictory, and that law is an argumentative practice. It's also a practice that cuts knots. We're not going to argue forever, because law is there to allow people to move forward. But before that decision is made, the contestability is key. And in that sense, the rule of law is a political way of ordering society. Now let's go to what I really want to talk about. So Popper said the demarcation between science and non-science is that only a theory that can explain real-world phenomena is scientific if From that theory, you can deduce predictions, hypotheses, predictions, that you can test against experience. Untestable hypotheses, theoretical frameworks, cannot be classified as scientific because they're not falsifiable. So from the perspective of Popper, that was a solution to the problem of induction, the inductive fallacy, which he says induction plays no role, should play no role, does not play a role in the choice of theory, and we'll come back to that when we discuss Peirce. So Popper was opposing the logical positivists who had a verifiability criterion. We would now say, because we all have to follow Kahneman, that this is confirmation bias. But basically he was saying, trying to verify something is not going to get you anywhere. If you want science, you have to first develop a theory that explains real-world phenomena. Then you have to be able, otherwise it's not a scientific theory, you have to be able to deduce from that predictions that you can inductively test. So let's take an example. Newton. Things fall down if you don't hold them. The acceleration depends on their weight. That's what we see. That's an observation, actually. And at some point, we all also said we see that the moon circles around the Earth. Of course, these are not theories. These are observations. They don't explain anything. So Newton's universal theory of gravity explains why this is happening, and that theory is falsifiable, and because it is falsifiable, it is being further developed, because falsification means you sometimes have to correct or rewrite your theory. It doesn't always mean you have to throw it out. And of course, this is the story about the fact that in a vacuum, heavy and light things fall equally fast, Newton's second law of motion. And in the case of very large or very small gravitational forces, things work differently. Einstein's theory of general relativity counts for this and then situates Newton's theory, shows how it is limited to a specific situation. So here we are talking about real scientific theories. And for Popper, that means that's fallibilism. Even the best theory that you have tried to falsify in many different ways, you're never sure. That's fallibilism. Let's draw it more towards our side, because we're not usually busy as lawyers with Newton. Let's say most offenders linked to variables X, Y, Z commit more crimes, and this might be relevant for a decision on bail or a decision on detention, pre-trial detention, etc., in view of recidivism. Another example is the large language model. X is able to generate a summary of a text based on the core methodology next token guessing. These are, again, not theories. They don't explain anything. To develop a theory, we need to look for explanations. And an important question here is explanations of what? For Popper and Peirce, these were explanations of real-world patterns. So that there is a pattern in the distribution of a data set, that's very interesting. But they said you then have to check whether that pattern is there in the real world. Then you may be able to falsify if you have a theory that explains that pattern in the real world. So you will have to get out of intra-model testing. And of course you have to construct the theory in a way that allows for falsification, once again based on real-world empirical findings. And it's not the same as saying, oh, we have another data set. We have training data, we have validation data, and now we have test data. Now, test data is not what Popper and Peirce were talking about. They were talking about real-world patterns. That means you have to do real-world empirical research. And that means you need domain experts, depending on what your theory is about. Now let's move to Peirce. Peirce distinguished between abduction, deduction, and induction. So abduction is the leap from observed phenomena to their explanation. And as a theory, they often call it a hypothesis, but basically they're talking about a theoretical framework. It's a bit more complex than just a hypothesis. If we look at recidivism, we could say that it can be explained by a specific, complex set of individual social and societal relational properties which may involve biological, historical, institutional, and environmental affordances. Now we're talking theory, and in social sciences, theory is very complex. The next step, if that were to be your theory, and you have to fill in which set of properties and affordances. This is still very abstract. The next thing you have to do is get a prediction, deduce a prediction. If this theory is correct, then it follows that's it. It's a deduction. But you have to find a deduction that is able to falsify the theory. So you have to pick out at least one supposedly relevant property that can be tested by way of, for instance, a sensitivity analysis, where you keep all the other properties the same and you test what happens if you vary this particular property. There's a lot more to say about that, but now we're talking theory. And then the third step, said Peirce, is induction. So induction is not to inference to a theory. That, he says, is not scientific. It has nothing to do with science. Induction is for testing the deduced prediction. And that would, in this case, mean looking for real-world examples that falsify the impact of the relevant property. Let's look at LLMs, because that's very important for legal technologies. So let's try to imagine what a theoretical framework would be that can explain what LLMs actually do. So I don't want to know what inside the computer happens. I'm trying to find out what the real-world patterns that this system is claimed to say something about, what the real-world patterns are about and how they can be explained. So I'm just trying this out. So I said, let's articulate it like this. So real-world understanding by humans of the output of these systems. That's what we need to explain. How come that they produce something that we understand as sort of a human text? We need to explain that. We could do that by saying that written speech has a structure. Think semiotics, syntax, pragmatics, for instance. That's one part of the explanation. The other part is the fact that humans have the ability to attribute meaning to speech acts. But what does that mean? That means that humans can link extra-linguistic references to the linguistic signs. And in this case, the linguistic signs are words. As we know, LLMs work with word tokens. They're not interested in words. So they do something entirely different, and I'm not interested in explaining what the machine does exactly. That's not the point here now. I'm interested in the claim that this machine produces patterns, and I want to explain how come that we read those patterns as if they are meaningful. Now, when I say extra-linguistic references, I mean both what in speech act theory is called brute facts. Let's say this is a brute fact. A mountain is a brute fact. The kitchen in the building is a brute fact. And there is institutional facts, like the university, a marriage. Sorry, marriage as an institution, as an institutional fact. These are have a different mode of existence, you could say. So if I say the university, I can mean either the brute fact of the building, that's part here, but when we talk about the university, we talk about something that is made of words and of meaning attribution. So how come that human beings, when they see the output of LLMs, attribute meaning, extra-linguistic reference to these words? This is what we need to explain. Okay, so when the semantic and or syntactic and or pragmatic structure of the written speech changes, so in the real world, the meaning of terms, of words, of sentences, of paragraphs, of idioms, of constrained disciplinary languages is continuously, either slowly or fast, changing. That means that the extra-linguistic references change, the context changes, the world in which we move changes. But this is in the future, and we all know that you cannot train a model or an algorithm on future data. And this sentence demonstrates the inductive fallacy that is key to machine learning. You cannot train on future data. You can only train on historical data. So this only works if the distribution of future data is the same as the distribution of current data. If that's not the case, the machine does not learn what we need it to learn. So deduction means that you sort of say, if it is true that this is why, that this top part, the abducted theoretical framework, if that really explains why people understand the output of these machines, then we can predict that if the situation changes, there will be errors. And the computer scientists who are here will say, oh, that's not a problem. We call that concept drift or data drift. But that's, again, an intra-computer science, intra-model concept. These are other concepts than what I'm talking about. So now let's see if we can falsify. Let's look for real-world examples that LLMs can foresee novel extra-linguistic references. Because if my little theory that I made up like a couple of days ago, and we need much more rigorous research, of course, than what I tried to develop. But if that theory is incorrect, then the machine might become sentient and actually foresee novel extra-linguistic references that were not in the training data. Yeah? And we hear a lot about these emergent properties. And so here we have how we could falsify, and that is inductive testing. And let's say that this is the core slide, this is the core message that I have. And I'm completely aware that this is an attempt to think in terms of how can we develop some real theoretical perspectives. So, as I said, they were both fallibalists at any point a scientific theory, the result of abduction, not induction, can be falsified. And in principle, one counterexample would suffice, though most theories we know are probabilistic, and that makes everything much more complex. Scientific knowledge remains falsifiable by definition. The minute it's not falsifiable, it's a belief, an ideology. Popper and Peirce are not saying that non-falsifiable claims are meaningless. Not at all. It's only saying that's not scientific knowledge. There are many different types of knowledge. Religious, I'm sure with most important decisions that you make in your life, you're not turning to science. Maybe some of you, I don't know, but there are many different types of knowledge. But sometimes it is very important to distinguish between scientific and non-scientific knowledge, and to realize that by definition, scientific knowledge is uncertain. I would dare to say that all other types of knowledge are also uncertain, but that's another discussion. Now, let's take some examples of what might seem a falsification. Performance metrics. Performance metrics have no theory. They're completely intra-model. So they look at the distribution of training data, validation data, and then at test data. So they're comparing distributions and doing some very complex and important mathematical things, but it has nothing to do with theory that explains why the patterns that are in the data are actually in the real world. And I don't know about you, but I'm not interested in a system that tells me all sorts of wonderful patterns that are not in the real world, because that means I'm taking myself for a ride if I deploy that system. And furthermore, I think that these metrics, accuracy, recall, precision, are geared towards verification. They're looking for verification and not for falsification. They cannot look for falsification because there is no theory to falsify. Remember, Popper said, falsification means inductive testing of real-world patterns that can falsify a theory. Well, then we have adversarial machine learning. So that means you try to test a system by, for instance, doing a prompt attack or changing in an image a few pixels to show that the understanding between inverted commas of the system is very limited. We all know the examples when the system, an AI system was asked to distinguish between a wolf and a dog. That's actually classification, it's not an LLM. To distinguish between pictures of a wolf and a dog, the system turned out to do very well until they showed a dog walking in the snow. That was a wolf. Because it turns out that the system only looked at whether there is snow or not. Depending on the training data that you give the system, it uses Occam's razor, so it says, okay, every time there's snow, it's a wolf, and otherwise it's a dog. Because it doesn't know dogs or wolves, it's never met them, so it operates mathematically. So again, I think adversarial machine learning is a very important domain of research, but it has nothing to do with theory, so it cannot falsify. If you have no theory, you cannot falsify. Okay, let's now get down to theory. So the idea of Popper and Peirce is that theory requires an abduction from real-world phenomena, not from data, from real-world phenomena. And especially that can explain patterns in these real-world phenomena. Now, from that theoretical requirement, you can already see this will always need to involve domain experts. If you want to develop a theory, you will have to involve people who know something about that particular domain. and whether that's health, whether that's biochemistry or the law, that doesn't matter. This is the people you need, otherwise you will not be able to abduct a theory. Now, in 2008, there was a famous article by Chris Anderson in Wired, who said, well, the scientific method has been working on causality, trying to find the causes of things, but we now have something so great. We have all the data. So we don't have to work with samples anymore. We have what in statistics is called the population. And actually, a famous lawyer, Meyer Schoenberger, co-authored a book with Cook here, who was the AI journalist with The Economist. And in that book, on one of the first pages, they say, well, big data means N is all. That's statistics. And it's absolute nonsense. Any computer scientist can tell you that if you want to go from the real world to a data set, you will have to make many technical decisions, because these systems only operate if they can pass the logic gates of a computational system. At least that's the systems that we have now. In my book, Smart Technology in the Ends of Law, I tried to deal with this claim, the idea that the correlation, so the distribution of the training data, have supposedly been derived from the population instead of a sample. This idea has induced an unprecedented belief in their values as the best type of knowledge available. So Chris Anderson basically said, oh, causality, that's so passé, come on. That's a waste of time, because before you have even begun to find causality, you've already found new correlations. And so now that we have extended our mind into the computational powerhouse of big data, we might want to discard the constraint imposed on our cognition by a quest for causal relationship. Let's not do that anymore. And of course, I believe he's wrong. It does not imply that we have all the data. Why? Because any real-world phenomenon can be translated into data, into a data set in different ways, depending on your purpose. Yeah. Okay. Important thing, both according to Peirce and Popper, the observations that you need to falsify, so real-world empirical research, depend on a frame of reference. They are, in the words of Popper, theory-laden. Oh my God. So we're using empirical data, and maybe we thought, well, now that's the easy part, because this is the real world, an observation. I just saw it, so it's true, right? So now I can falsify. But Popper and Peirce, we're talking about scientific research, we're very, very aware that the observation itself is already theory-laden. And that means from Popper to Kuhn, you don't even need to put one foot before the other. Kuhn is already in Popper. It means you have to suspend your judgment and try to look around the corner of your own theorizations and be a bit skeptical about that. And that is also why data is not equivalent with empirical observations. So if you have created a data set, training data set for whatever purpose, you need to talk to the domain experts to see what you got right and what you got wrong. And what is easier than to cherry pick your domain experts, to cherry pick lawyers who are already geared towards pure logic or to statistical thinking, and to invite them into your research project, and then to say, oh, this is a very interdisciplinary project, and all the lawyers, we have 3 lawyers and we all agree, so we got it right. No, that's not science. What we need is to get lawyers who say, you're completely right. This is the right way to construct the training data. And then 2 or 3 other lawyers who say, this is the wrong data set for the following 6 reasons. And then comes the third one who says, oh, both of them got it wrong, don't listen to them, it's like this. Now we're in science, which is of course very complicating. And sometimes when you do research, you prefer to cherry pick, but it's not a good idea. So data is always a digital proxy for such observations. Now, I would dare to claim that most AI research at this moment is atheoretical, and perhaps even anti-theoretical. Without theory, we succumb to the inductive fallacy. I think much machine learning and LLMs, etc., is basically built on the inductive fallacy. Now, here we have a very interesting article by somebody who is well known in Montreal, where Yosha Benjo and his co-author basically say that for deep learning, which suffers in my terms from the inductive fallacy, we're never going to get to artificial general intelligence or whatever. Never. This is not going to work. We need to help the system by already pointing out what sort of inductive bias we need. So Tom Mitchell, in his introduction to machine learning, says, there is no machine learning without bias. The bias is what you need. This is what builds your system. It's the distribution of your data. There are no data sets with random distributions. You have to work very hard to get one. Okay, so he says, and we all know that Sergio Benjo is one of the founding fathers of deep learning. He says, it's good in learning when the distribution of the test data is the same as that of the training data. It's not so good in out-of-distribution generalization, right? So then he links to Kahneman's System 1 learning, the intuitive learning, where you can achieve a lot of complexity. And he says that is what current deep learning does. And then they suggest that we need these so-called inductive biases to enable out-of-distribution learning. And I think there is something here that if it goes together with a theoretical framework, we're beginning to meet science. So these inductive biases are meant to prioritize some of the data patterns and parameters over others. That means we're now in the realm of abduction. And they call the introduction of these biases system 2 learning. That's our neocortex, which is very slow and very limited. But we get a very long way with that compared to system 1. Here you have some technical details of what they, technically speaking, mean with these inductive biases that you have to insert. There I don't see much theory yet. So I would like to go to the underlying theories. Why these inductive biases, which is a very confusing term here, but it's their term. Okay, this is just to show you an example of what I think is done by computer scientists themselves, who know their systems in and out because they actually co-invented them, are trying to get from just a model to real theory. So I'm wrapping up. The digital transition that is upon us, the European Commission has said we must all now go through the digital transition. They've been saying that for some years, of course. And first they published the AI Continent Action Plan, which was still very abstract, and they just now presented their report on the Apply AI strategy. And when you read that document, you can see that it has to be, in private and public organizations, AI first. Every organization, whether commercial, non-commercial, public, and AI first. We don't even know what AI is, what it does. We're still in the midst of everything. Everything has to be AI first. Okay. Even the European Commission needs some PR talk, and of course there is enormous geopolitical pressure on the Commission, so we understand why they write this, but not sure it's going to be very helpful. So to enable falsification, to wrap up, 2 requirements must be met. Abduction of falsifiable theoretical frameworks. That's very hard work, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of domain experts who are interested in computer science, who are going to learn about computer science, because otherwise they're no help. But that's just one part of it. The other part is empirical, real-world inductive testing, which is not the same as setting up your test set. Then something about Geert's complex concept of explication. I'm going to leave that. It's in the paper that you can find. Because we have to start thinking about how... So my experience with computer scientists, they either or both try to find in the data set relations that are logical, or they're interested in causality. But humans talking to each other and building society, that's built on speech acts. And speech acts are not causal but constitutive. I declare you husband and wife. That constitutes an institutional fact. If I'm the civil servant, I've not caused these people to marry, at least I hope not. And they're not married because of logic, just imagine. This is a speech act, it's a constitutive act, performative. I've not seen that being taken into account in computer science. When you're talking about the humanities, social science, this is not about causality and logic. It's there also, and it's important, but it's not enough. There's also conceptual overlap. If you want to do research about the relationship between risk and danger, yeah, you will find a relationship, but it's not causal. It's just conceptual overlap. Risk is defined in terms of danger. And this is the case with many terms that we use in the social sciences that are conceptually related. And of course, there's the whole issue of confounding factors in statistics. And complexity science, where complexity science basically shows you cannot predict things if the system you're researching is complex. So I'm always very surprised that people use complexity science to make their point, because that's the only point you can make with complexity science. And I think, oh yes, one last slide. So both in law and in scientific research, we can never be sure. That's absolutely key. But we have to make decisions and move on. So the decision to act on findings of research, both in legal practice and in research, is a normative decision. And that decision must always take into account the fallibilistic nature of knowledge. Contestability of results is key to the reliability of both legal decisions and scientific developments. And the use of LLMs and AI must be seen against this background. These models must be made falsifiable. That means connected with real scientific theory to validate their output. And this was it.